when can someone really recognize when that is starting to happen to them? When burnout is approaching, are there signs that people can realize and see?
Yeah, definitely. And this is again where sometimes hindsight's a jerk and you look back and you're just like, well, there were the signs. And so
Yeah.
that's why on my podcast I interview people that talk about their experiences of burnout because sometimes when you can
Hmm.
hear someone else explaining it, you're just like, oh, that's me. So
Yeah.
definitely listening to other people's stories is a really good place to
Hmm.
start. But
Hmm.
when you're feeling like you're constantly moving your to-do list items to the next day and the next day and the next day, it's just never possible to get them all done. That's
Hmm.
a really early red flag. When you feel like your brain is constantly scattered, that's another red
Hmm.
flag. When you're waking up at 3:30 to 4 a.m. in the morning and then struggling to fall asleep after that, that
Hmm.
is a typical burnout red flag. It's a really a function of cortisol, one of our stress hormones, which is really our natural coffee, like our caffeine kick. And so
Hmm.
it just wakes us up earlier because those levels are higher. So it hits that let's wake up threshold a little sooner. Other signs that are a little bit less common are like increased irritability, when you have
Hmm.
less patience than normal, or when something
Hmm.
comes out of your mouth and you're just like, who was that? That did not sound like me at all. Can I take that back, please? So those are some real good signs. And then also
Yep.
some that are a little bit surprising are numbness and tingling in your hands, and then also
Yeah.
itchiness in your feet.
Hello, my extraordinary women friends. Welcome back to another episode where we shine a light on the powerful journeys of women entrepreneurs who are rewriting how business is done. Today, we're tackling a topic that all of us have experienced at some time in our life: burnout. It's a pervasive issue across all sectors of our society, but the good news is there are simple, actionable steps that you can begin today. To guide us through this process, I am thrilled to introduce Avery Thatcher. Avery began her career as an ICU registered nurse, where she witnessed firsthand how many of her patients' severe health issues were linked to chronic stress. Driven by a desire to shift from reactive to proactive care, Avery stepped away from the ICU to launch her own business focused on helping high achievers prevent and reverse the negative health effects of stress. Today, Avery will share not only practical tips to kickstart your recovery from burnout, but also her personal story, which might just be what you need. So let's dive into this vital conversation and learn how we can better manage our stress and reclaim our health and vitality. Let's meet Avery Thatcher.
Well, welcome to Extraordinary Women Radio, Avery. It's great to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Cami. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, this is a good topic. I think I've been doing a whole series of different wellness podcasts just recently. It just naturally showed up that way, and I hadn't really planned it, but I love that they're just really coming back to back to back. And I think it's really important that we are diving into wellness and health and how do we take care of ourselves. And so I think this is going to be just such a great topic today as we talk about burnout. Tell us before we dive in. Tell us where you're at. I think you're in Canada.
That's right. Yes, I'm in Alberta, Canada. So it is
Yeah,
still winter-ish up here, but it's good.
yeah, yeah. It's starting to turn here, and we have little sprouts of green grass, and that makes me really happy. And that's, I think that's one of my wellness things is when I can get outside and be in the lovely spring weather. It just makes me feel so good.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I want to hear some of your story, and I know your website is called Becoming Avery. So tell us the story of you becoming Avery.
Yeah, sure. So I started my career working as a registered nurse in various intensive care units. So the place where you go when
Wow.
you're really, really sick.
Yeah.
And I was doing that for a little while. And really early on, I noticed that the majority of the reasons why adults found themselves in the ICU were because of illnesses and diseases that could be linked to chronic stress. So I
Hmm.
decided to get out of the reactive side of medicine, started building my business in 2015, helping people with managing their stress, preventing and reversing those negative health effects. And I was doing the meditation, the yoga, the journaling, like all of the things, the somatic, spending time in nature. I was doing everything quote unquote right. And then I was coming off a night shift at the end of 2018. The charge nurse looked me in the eye and she said, "You do not look well. Go home and rest up. I'll
Mm.
mark you down as sick for your next couple shifts. feel better. And then I slept for 20 hours. And I slept for
Oh my
20 hours the
gosh.
next day and the day after that.
Wow.
And my life literally changed overnight. And it took away so much of who I saw myself as. And I was not able to work in a hospital anymore. I was not able to work kind of period, except for in the business that I had started building. And it just frustrated me so much because I felt like I, again, was doing everything quote unquote right. Yet I still had this incredibly epic burnout that eventually led to a couple of health diagnoses and a permanent disability. And so along this journey, I just realized that so much of my identity had been tied up in what I was doing in my career. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that there wasn't going to be a compromise. There was no like middle ground to find. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where I decided to change my first name. So I spent 37 years of my life as Heather. And
Oh
then
wow.
I decided that I needed to let Heather go. I needed a fresh
Okay.
start. I needed to be able to
Mm-hmm.
move forward with all of these new health conditions. And went through a bunch of baby name blogs, found the name Avery. And the first time my partner called me Avery, it's like something settled in my body. Like it's like I
Oh
came
wow.
home and it just felt right. And yeah, I feel like, especially when I meet people now, they're just like, I don't see you as a Heather. And I'm like,
Yeah, you're
Avery?
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, and you and I had met before, and I definitely don't see you as a Heather. So I get that.
Yeah.
So you actually did. You went through the name shift. What happened for you as you took on this new you?
So the beginning part of it was absolutely scary. I definitely had a core fear of the process kind of holding me back a little bit because my business was branded around Heather Thatcher. The social media, the websites, all of the freebies, the courses, all of the resources, it was
So
all
you'd
made by
already
that.
started your own business. You moved
Mm-hmm.
out of the
Yeah.
nursing space and really started your own business.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was already
All right.
running on the side while I was still working full time because I
Mm-hmm.
wanted a little bit more of a buffer before I
Right.
decided to stop.
Right.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but then my body said, no, the time is now. You're going to stop right now. So, yeah, that initial phase was really scary. It was really
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
Um, but I had the support of my partner. And then when I told people, it was kind of shocking just how many. So, like when I emailed out to my list, I got hundreds of emails back of someone that's either changed their first name or knew somebody that had. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just
Mm-hmm.
wild just how common it was because I felt like I was this super big weirdo, but turns out I was not. And then, right, like it's always nice to know you're in good company.
Totally,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. And then I also, once I announced it then on social media, some of the groups that I had done like testimonial videos for or written testimonials for, within a week, all of those videos had been rebranded as Avery Thatcher. And I was just so touched that they respected and understood the need for the name change. They knew me well enough to know that there was good reason behind this. So I think,
Yeah,
yeah, like it was very scary, but like so many things in life, once you
yeah,
start to step into that, you're just like, okay, it's not as bad as I thought. Still scary, but not as bad as I thought.
right. And I always I always love stories of transformation and change. Like when we hear this calling that something's supposed to be different and we step into it and we move forward into it. And you were hearing such a deep calling of the shift from within, which I think is really where our biggest shifts come is from within. My book is Fire Dancer, Your Spiral Journey to a Life of Passion and Purpose. And it's all about that, like that painstaking transformation that it takes. And it, like you said, it's not an easy step that we make, but what happens is we become more aligned. So when you started to really become more aligned with you and you felt this relief in your body, how did this, I know you were already doing a lot of these wellness practices. How did that all integrate? What happened there?
Yeah. So I was actually leading one of the group programs that I have. And we always go through this program, and I always do it with them because once you
Hmm.
uncover one layer, then there's another layer of something nasty underneath you got to go in and figure out. So I was doing the program with them, and we all talk about it together. And one of these components is you write a grief letter.
Hmm.
And so you just start to talk to a part of you, someone from your past, something that you need to grieve and be able to let go. So I started writing a
Yeah.
grief letter to my illness.
Uh-huh.
And I was just typing away, and I usually journal just before bed on the treadmill. We got a little desk on it and typing away. And then I got so mad. I was just like feeling all of this anger coming up from like 3 years of struggling to accept that this is the new me. And I was just writing it, and I was getting so loud in my typing. And then all of a sudden, something softened, and I realized that this part of me deserved compassion, and it deserved a
Mm-hmm.
safe space, and it deserved
Mm-hmm.
love. Oh, I'm gonna cry again. And I was just this ugly, crying puddle of a person. I had to get off the treadmill because it was not safe to be on it anymore. And I just collapsed to the ground and cried 3 years of grief just to be able to really, instead of fight this part of me that's annoying and that I really wish wasn't there, and instead embrace it and say, I'm going to take care of you. We're going to figure this out. You belong here. I will bring you in. And I think it was that moment for me that you really just created like acceptance for sure, but not so much just like accepting like, okay, right now it's like this, but like
Mm-hmm.
it's so much easier to put in some of those practices that I know were going to help me long term. So fighting some of the strategies that my medical team were suggesting to me that I was just like, I can't do that. I'm a high achiever. I need to be able to do more things. And then just really allowing that to settle in, I think. So it was really just that compassion piece, opening up that
Yeah.
space for the part that I wish wasn't there and saying
Yeah.
instead, you belong. We're going to figure
Yeah.
this out.
Yeah. Yeah, what an incredible journey you've been on. So how did this really evolve into you standing, really in the realms of burnout and like, using that's part of what, what you stand for and you teach. And so how did burnout kind of come into the mix? So was there awareness at some point that was like, oh my gosh, this is burnout? Was there awareness right up front? What do you know about burnout?
Yeah. So in those moments and like, over those first couple of years of like figuring out what happened, because hindsight's a jerk. And so when you look back now, you can see all the red flags. So
Yeah.
initially in the moment, I was so upset because I felt lied to. A lot of the research was saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you'll be healthy. And I was doing
Hmm.
this, and this, and still crashed in a very epic way. So, being the super nerd that I am and not ready to give up on anything, I went back into the research and I really discovered that burnout is not a stress management problem, it is an
Hmm.
energy management problem. And so, when I
Mm.
started to look at it from
That's
that
really, say that
perspective,
again, because that's really powerful. Burnout is not say it.
yeah, burnout's not a stress management problem, it's an energy management problem.
It's brilliant. Brilliant.
And one of my favorite ways to like make this clear is that if we just like imagine that we're in a boat and the boat is
Hmm.
full of holes and water is slowly leaking into our boat. We have a bucket, so we're going to slowly bail ourselves out, scooping that water out of the boat or out of the boat. But then eventually the water pours in too fast and we can't keep up with bailing it out. And so that's when our life jacket catches us. So really in our scenario here, those holes in our boat, those are the sources of our stress. Those are our responsibilities. Those are our work tasks. Those are family dynamics. There's so many things that can create drain that flows into our life. And some of them are beautiful and wonderful. Like
Hmm.
I'm learning
Hmm.
roller skating. It's still a hole in my boat, but it's something which I really enjoy, but it definitely drains my energy. So we
Right.
need to
Right.
start looking at not just do I need to do more stress management things because those are your bucket that you're using to bail yourself out, but what can I do to make sure that I can have the capacity and the energy that I need to maintain enough balance to continue to bail out all of
Mm.
the things that are pouring into my life on a daily
Yeah.
basis?
Yeah. That's a really good analogy. I like that a lot. Why is burnout? Let's before we go there. It's like what is the difference between stress and burnout? Right. What's different?
Yeah, great question. So, stress initially, and like from a design perspective, our body was designed to see something stressful, fight or flight, our way to
Hmm.
safety, and then turn off. But
Yeah.
chronic stress has now introduced new research and new understanding of how stress appears in our body. And this is where also the freeze or fawn response has started to come forward. And so really
And
when
say
we're
fawn, because I've heard fawn recently, but just explain fawn.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, fight or flight is the typical one where we think that we're either like
Right, right.
fighting
Uh-huh.
or running away. Freeze is where we
Yeah.
feel like and you can't move anywhere. Fawn is a
Hmm.
similar kind of freeze response. And so instead of feeling that stuckness, fawn is when you try and control as much as you can, calm the situation as much as you can. It's really driven from still that safety perspective, but you're just looking to make absolutely everybody as happy as possible so that way you're no longer
Hmm.
in emotional, mental, or physical danger.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. 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 Um, and so that burnout is different than stress is really just to kind of carry on that.
Yeah, yeah. So the initial stage of our stress response, our chronic stress response, is that stage of alarm. The like
Hmm.
moment when you first experience stress, and then our body's meant to see it, fix it, and then go away. And so then we're going to move into the next stage of stress because most of the stressors in our life don't go away. We have inflation and global crises and the world's on fire and all of the things. So that keeps us in this next stage, which is the stage of resistance. And so this is where our body is able to maintain, consume, or create enough energy to keep up with this demand of that stress
Hmm.
response being on. And so
Hmm.
when we can no longer keep up with the energy in that stage of resistance, that's when we move into the stage of exhaustion, also known as burnout. And so this is
Okay.
where our body is not able to consume enough energy or create enough energy to be able to keep up with all of the things that are pouring into our boat. So
Yeah.
burnout exists at the end point of stress, at the end point
Oh,
of productivity and
yeah.
pressure.
Yeah. And that's really what happened. Like when you slept for those, several 20-hour days, is you had reached the end of all the stress being put onto you and saying, I
Exactly.
can't do anymore. This
Yeah,
is
that
really
was my
where I'm
burnout
at.
life jacket being like, you are
Yeah.
sleeping. We
Yeah.
need a pause here for sure.
Yeah. 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 So, when can someone really recognize when that is starting to happen to them, when burnout is approaching? Are there signs that people can realize and see?
Yeah, definitely. And this is again where sometimes hindsight's a jerk and you look back and you're just like, well, there were the signs. And so
Yeah.
that's why on my podcast, I interview people that talk about their experiences of burnout. Because sometimes when you can
Hmm.
hear someone else explaining it, you're just like, oh, that's me. So
Yeah.
definitely listening to other people's stories is a really good place to
Hmm.
start. But
Hmm.
when you're feeling like you're constantly moving your to-do list items to the next day and the next day and the next day, it's just never possible to get them all done.
Hmm.
That's a really early red flag. When you feel like your brain is constantly scattered, that's another red
Hmm.
flag. When you're waking up at 3:30 to 4 a.m. in the morning and then struggling to fall asleep after that, that
Hmm.
is a typical burnout red flag. It's really a function of cortisol, one of our stress hormones, which is really our natural coffee, like our caffeine kick. And so
Hmm.
it just wakes us up earlier because those levels are higher. So it hits that let's wake up threshold a little sooner. Other signs that are a little bit less common are like increased irritability, when you have
Hmm.
less patience than normal, or when something
Hmm.
comes out of your mouth and you're just like, who was that? That did not sound like me at all. Can I take that back, please? So those are some real good signs. And then also
Yep.
some that are a little bit surprising are numbness and tingling in your hands, and then also
Yeah.
itchiness in your feet.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard that one. That's interesting. I can go back to when I left the corporate world 15 years ago. I was definitely on the edge of burnout, and there was a lot of things. I was in disagreement with several people that I'd always had really great relationships with. I was catching colds really consistently. I mean, it's like I always was
Mm-hmm.
catching one cold or another.
Yeah.
Um, I had actually had an employee who had worked for me for through three different companies. And one day he looked at me and says, "I don't know who you are." A
Mm-hmm.
classic sign of what's happening here. And we're great friends still to this day, but I was just at that phase where like things were just breaking down for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
I can totally relate to those moments where you start to just feel that build up like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is it? So why is burnout so prevalent in our society right now? And I mean, it's a lot of obvious reasons. I mean, just the nature of what's happening in our world is heavy and big. But can you just address that a little bit?
Yes, for sure. So just to give it some context as well, Indeed.com, which is a job search agency,
Mm-hmm.
they did a study in 2019 just asking people to rate their general stress levels and if they thought they were experiencing burnout. And so in 2019, the rates were like 9 to 11%. They did the study again in 2022 and 2023, and they found that the results were 67 to 73% of people were
Wow.
experiencing burnout. So it is really interesting, and it is absolutely so much more prevalent post-pandemic. I think
Mm-hmm.
people are trying to make up for lost time because things have
Mm-hmm.
definitely shifted a lot in there. But we can
Yeah.
actually track the growth of burnout all the way back to the Industrial Revolution. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, the word priority was only ever singular. And it was only after
Oh,
assembly lines and multitasking and systems and things came in, our modern day capitalism took over, that now priority has become priorities. And so when we
yeah.
look at the Latin root for that word, it says first thing or thing that comes
Yeah.
before.
Right.
And you can really only have one first thing. But we've been taught to
Mm.
have multiple first things.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh,
it's
this is
this
brilliant, Avery.
scattering of things that makes it so much harder for us to focus. Because one of the ways that our stress response works is when it's really ramped up, we actually lose access to our prefrontal cortex, our higher level thinking brain. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you think about it, if you're busy running away from something dangerous,
You're
contemplating
not
the meaning
thinking.
of
Yeah.
life, not a
Yeah.
priority, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're
Yeah.
going to go back to the instinctual side. So this is where, when we're struggling to balance all of these different things, it's because our stress response was not designed for this. And so we have to learn how to balance that and work with it.
Yeah. So interesting. So interesting. And the if you think about what's happened after the pandemic, what's the you know what's the weight there? What's the heaviness of this epidemic? As we and is that the right word? Epidemic? I don't know. It's
It
not, maybe
is
not an
actually.
epidemic. Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
the World Health Organization has declared stress and burnout as an epidemic for
Oh wow.
several years.
Okay.
Like I think since
Okay.
2009, it's been a while.
Okay. So what's the increase? I mean, what's driving that increase?
So we can see the steady increases happening over time, but I think with the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, it started to create so much more emotional drain in our life. Like
Mm-hmm.
you talked about, with what everything that's going on in the world, it's
Mm-hmm.
creating more holes in our boat that are so much more
Mm-hmm.
significant. And so this is
Yeah.
where, when we're looking at energy, we have to think about it not just in the context of I either have energy today or I don't, because you're a complex human. So when we look at it through the 4 different energy batteries that we have, it gives us a much
Mm-hmm.
more complete picture. So we have physical energy, we have mental energy, we have emotional energy, and then fulfillment energy. That's our connection to making a difference, our purpose, feeling
Mm.
aligned with our life. And so when we look at things that have shifted in our world, there's a lot more mental energy drains, there's a lot more emotional energy drains, especially post pandemic, that created such a divisive environment.
Yeah, and we also have so much more information coming at us
Oh, so
than we
true.
have
Like you
ever
look at
had,
social
right?
media and
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So what do we do? I mean, so what's the what's the how do we take care of ourselves in the mix of all that noise around us, but really find our way to stay grounded, to take care of ourselves?
Yeah, so great question again. I think there's a couple of really easy things that we can do. The
Mm-hmm.
first relates back to those energy batteries that we talked about. So in the
Mm-hmm.
morning, I recommend that everyone just check in and see, like, okay, which one of my energy batteries is lowest? Am I
Okay.
lacking physical, emotional, mental, or fulfillment energy today? And then you plan your day a little bit around that. So,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter what job you're in, you do have the ability to shift tasks a little bit and prepare for deadlines in different ways. So, if you're really low on mental energy that day, maybe don't write the massive presentation and the proposal that you were going to be working on. Choose some of the
Yeah.
lower hanging fruit, the more admin tasks from the week. So, really
Yeah.
working with your energy rather than against it can be so
Yeah.
powerful. So, that's strategy number
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And then strategy number 2 is to regularly turn off your stress switch. Because when our stress switch is going all the time, we actually can lose access again to that prefrontal cortex, that higher level thinking brain, which then just slows down the rest of our life. So by knowing how to kind of hack our nervous system a little bit, we're able to quickly turn that stress switch off at regular intervals, which will also improve your sleep, which is the foundation for everything that we do. So
Right.
one of the easiest ways to do this is through 5-5-5 breathing. And so we take 5 slow, deep breaths for 5 seconds on the inhale and 5 seconds on the exhale. And if you do that 5 times a day, then you're going to regularly turn off that stress
Oh.
switch, and it's just going to continue to keep those levels lower so that you sleep better and have more energy in the morning. And I know 5
Yeah.
times a day sounds like a lot, but
But
if you do it,
it's,
oh, go
it's,
ahead.
it's only, yeah, it's not very long,
No,
really,
it's
if you
only
think
50
about it.
seconds. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's 50
right.
seconds each time. And if you do it first thing when you get up, before each major meal, and then before you go to bed, that's 5.
Okay.
So it's
That's
easy
excellent.
to
I
tack it
love
onto
it.
things. Yeah.
Totally. I love it. And that's one of the things that I always look for, like these ways to like remember the pauses throughout the day. And that's a great way to be able to think about that is to be able to pause like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
It's so
something
good.
simple that you can stack onto something you already do.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah. That's
last
good.
strategy that I recommend, it's called what if affirmations. So we've all heard about affirmations, the I am statements, I am enough, I am successful, and all of the things. But our brain has mental filters. And so if we say those things to ourselves, we could say it until we're blue in the face. But if we don't believe it, our brain's going to be like, okay, nice, whoosh, and just set it out to the side. It's like for the people that feel like they're not good with names, and
Mhm.
somebody's introducing themselves to you, and already by the time you finish shaking your hand, no idea what their name is. Your brain just
Right.
hears you're not good with names, flushes it out.
Hmm.
So when we
Hmm.
have what if formations, where we tack those 2 little words, what if, to the front of that sentence, it
Hmm.
creates a space for a conversation. So what if
Mm.
I am enough? What if I can prioritize this? What if I am worthy of rest? And it just allows, again, for a conversation rather than you trying to fight that part of your brain that doesn't believe it yet.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love it. What ifs? I like it.
What ifs?
Okay. Okay. So, where can people learn more about you and your work, Avery?
Thank you for asking. So they can find so many things on my website. You can go to becomingavery.com. I have a free resources section there that's got bunches of things, including a self-sabotage style quiz. So it helps you discover your self-sabotage style and then figure out what to do now that you know what it is.
That's excellent. I love it. And then the final question I always close with is, what are 3 pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave with us today?
So I would like you to remember that always do your best doesn't mean always be perfect,
Mm,
because your best is going to change moment to moment, day to day, and
hmm.
it's never
Hmm.
going to be the same, and that's okay. That's really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
The next thing that I would love for you to remember is that self-care doesn't have to be some elaborate 30-minute ritual. 60 seconds is better than no seconds at all. So taking those little moments, those little pockets of time in your day to try things like the 5-5-5 breathing can be a game changer for you. And then the last piece is to, instead of try a gratitude practice, try celebrating instead. Because gratitude is often
Mm.
focused on external things, but we need to also focus on celebrating us, how we showed up in
Mm.
struggles, how we held space for somebody. So just thinking about how you can celebrate yourself a little bit more.
Brilliant. I love it so much. Avery, this has been really insightful and you've brought so many just really interesting conversation around this. So I've learned some things here. So thank you so much for sharing all your good wisdom.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really grateful.